leaned into Jerome Thompson's face. I can lean into Jerome Thompson's face. I can ruin your whole life before you even make it to that courtroom. The gentle hum of the coffee maker filled the Thompson kitchen as the first rays of Chicago's sunlight streamed through the windows. Jerome Thompson stood at the granite counter, his broad shoulders filling out a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, reviewing blueprints that were spread across the surface like a paper puzzle. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built his success one careful calculation at a time. "Daddy, why do you have to go to the place with the big hammer today?" 9-year-old Maya asked, sliding into the kitchen wearing her favorite purple dress and mismatched socks. Her dark eyes sparkled with the kind of curiosity that could turn any ordinary morning into an adventure. Jerome looked up from his plans, a warm smile replacing the concentration on his face. "It's called a gavel, sweetheart, not a hammer, though I suppose they do look similar." He lifted her onto the counter beside his blueprints. "See this?" He pointed to the detailed drawings. "This is going to be a new community center right here in our neighborhood, where kids like you can come to learn and play and feel safe." Maya traced the lines with her small finger, her brow furrowed in thought. "But if you're building something good for kids, why would anyone try to stop you?" "That doesn't make sense, Daddy." The question hit Jerome in a way that only a child's innocent logic could. He paused, considering how to explain the complexities of zoning boards and city politics to someone who still believed the world operated on simple principles of right and wrong. Sometimes sweetheart grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be, but that's why we have judges and courts to help everyone remember what's fair. Lisa Thompson entered the kitchen, her nurse's scrubs crisp and her expression carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much of what happened when fairness failed. "You sure you want to take Maya with you today? I know it's bring your child to work day at the firm, but a courthouse isn't exactly a playground." Jerome wrapped his arms around both his wife and daughter, creating a small circle of warmth in the morning light. The hearing should be routine, just presenting the plans to the zoning board. Besides, Maya's my good luck charm. He tickled his daughter's side, earning a delighted giggle. "And maybe she'll help me remember to speak slowly and use simple words instead of all that engineering jargon." "Promise me you'll be careful." Lisa said, her voice carrying the kind of worry that came from loving a black man in America. "You know how some people look at success, especially when it doesn't match what they expect to see." Jerome kissed her forehead gently. "I promise. We'll be home before dinner and Maya can tell you all about how boring court proceedings really are." He gathered his portfolio, a leather case that contained not just blueprints, but years of dreams made tangible. Ready to go build something amazing. "Kiddo?" Maya jumped down from the counter, her mismatched socks hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Ready. Can I carry one of your important papers?" "You can carry the most important one of all," Jerome said, handing her a single sheet that showed the playground area of the proposed community center. "This is the part that's just for kids like you." As they walked toward the door, Maya looked up at her father with the kind of absolute trust that could break a heart or mend one. "Daddy, when we get to the place with the big hammer, will you tell them that I helped design the playground because I think kids should always have a say in where they get to play?" Jerome felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of pride and protective instinct. "I absolutely will, sweetheart. You might be the most important advisor I have." The Cook County Circuit Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice against the Chicago skyline, its limestone facade weathered by decades of hopes and disappointments. Jerome held Maya's hand as they climbed the wide steps, her small fingers warm and trusting in his larger ones. The morning air carried the scent of coffee and car exhaust, the familiar smell of a city waking up to another day of possibilities and problems. "Wow! Daddy, it's like a castle," Maya whispered. Her neck craned back to take in the full height of the building. Are there really dragons inside, or just the people with the hammers? Jerome chuckled, adjusting his portfolio under his arm. Just people, sweetheart, but sometimes people can be more complicated than dragons. As they approached the metal detectors, he began pointing out architectural details, his engineer's eye noting the structural modifications that had been made over the years. See how they reinforced those columns, and the way the new security entrance integrates with the original design. Officer Cassandra Blake leaned against the gleaming surface of a smart vending machine near the security checkpoint, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow still managed to look severe. At 38, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had spent 15 years proving she belonged in a man's world. But somewhere along the way, the armor had become the person. She watched Jerome and Maya through narrowed blue eyes, her jaw working a piece of gum with mechanical precision. Rodriguez, she muttered to her partner. Officer Tommy Rodriguez, a 24-year-old rookie whose nervous energy radiated from him like heat from pavement. You see that guy in the expensive suit? The one acting like he owns the place. Tommy squinted across the marble foyer, taking in Jerome's confident stride and Maya's animated chatter. The architect. Yeah, looks like he's here for the zoning thing. Seems nice enough, got his daughter with him and everything. Blake crushed her empty coffee cup with more force than necessary, the styrofoam crackling like breaking bones. Lawyers don't carry portfolios like that, rookie. And they sure as hell don't bring kids to court unless they're trying to play the sympathy angle. Her voice carried the kind of cynicism that had been earned through years of seeing the worst in people, but had somehow forgotten to notice the best. The smart vending machine hummed quietly behind her, its internal cameras and microphones designed to enhance customer experience and prevent theft. Though Blake paid it no more attention than she would any other piece of courthouse furniture. She had no way of knowing that the machine's advanced audio-visual recording system was capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to unfold. Jerome finished explaining the security procedures to Maya, who listened with the intense concentration of a child trying to understand adult rules. So the nice people in uniforms are here to keep everyone safe, she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the echoing space. That's right, sweetheart. Their job is to protect people and make sure everyone follows the rules so everyone can feel safe. Blake felt something twisted and bitter rise in her throat. The easy confidence in Jerome's voice, the way he moved through the world as if he belonged everywhere he went. The expensive suit and the perfect family picture they made together. All of it triggered something dark and resentful that had been growing inside her for years. She had worked twice as hard as any man to earn her badge, had endured comments and assumptions and challenges to her authority every single day. And here was someone who seemed to glide through life without ever having to prove himself. Look at him, she said to Rodriguez, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more venom than volume. Walking around like rules don't apply to him, like he's better than everyone else here. She straightened her utility belt, the weight of her weapon and badge familiar and comforting. That type thinks they can talk their way out of anything. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, his rookie instincts telling him something was wrong with his training officer's tone. Blake, he's just here for a hearing. His kid looks excited to be here like it's some kind of field trip. Kids are props, Rodriguez. Don't let them fool you. Blake pushed off from the vending machine, her boots clicking against the marble with military precision. Sometimes people need to be reminded that respect isn't something you can buy with a nice suit. Maya tugged on Jerome's sleeve, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed loud in the vast space. Daddy, why is that police lady staring at us? She looks angry. But we didn't do anything wrong. Jerome followed his daughter's gaze, meeting Blake's cold stare for a brief moment before looking away. He had learned long ago to recognize the signs the way certain people looked at success that didn't match their expectations. But this was a courthouse, a place where logic and evidence were supposed to matter more than prejudice and assumption. Sometimes people have bad days. Sweetheart, he said quietly, guiding Maya toward the elevators. The best thing we can do is focus on our own business and be respectful to everyone we meet. Blake watched them walk away, her hand resting casually but meaningfully on her radio. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the marble floor, and in those shadows a confrontation was brewing that would change all their lives forever. The courthouse hallway buzzed with the low-frequency anxiety that always permeated spaces where freedom and justice intersected. Jerome stood near the tall windows, his portfolio open on a marble ledge as he reviewed his presentation notes one final time. Maya sat on a nearby bench, her legs swinging freely as she studied the playground blueprints he had given her, occasionally pointing out features she thought would be super fun or really important for safety. Mr. Thompson. A shadow fell across Jerome's paperwork, and he looked up to see Officer Blake standing too close, her hand resting with casual menace near her holster. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the sharp angles of her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with power. Yes, Officer Jerome's voice remained calm and respectful, though his body tensed with the instinctive awareness that came from being a black man in America. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I need to see some identification," Blake said, her tone flat and demanding rather than requesting. She didn't ask, didn't explain, didn't acknowledge Maya's presence, even though the little girl had stopped swinging her legs and was watching the interaction with growing confusion. Jerome carefully closed his portfolio, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Of course, officer. May I ask what this is regarding?" He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, his engineer's mind already calculating the angles and possibilities of what was happening. Slowly, Blake barked, her hand snapping to her taser with theatrical precision designed to intimidate and humiliate. I said, slowly. Maya slipped off the bench and moved closer to her father, her small hand finding his free one. "Daddy, why is she being mean to you? You always taught me to be polite to people, especially when they're just doing their job." The innocent question hung in the air like a challenge, and Blake felt her jaw clench. She snatched Jerome's ID from his extended hand, studying it with the kind of theatrical intensity meant to suggest she was looking for something specific, though she had no idea what that might be. "Jerome Thompson," she read aloud, making his name sound like an accusation. "What's in the bag?" "Mr. Thompson blueprints and architectural plans," Jerome replied evenly. "I'm a structural engineer, and I have a hearing with the zoning board this morning regarding a community center project." Maya piped up with the helpfulness of a child who believed in the fundamental goodness of adults. "He's building a playground for kids like me. Do you want to see the pictures I helped design the swing set area?" Blake's eyes narrowed as she looked from the father to the daughter, seeing something that triggered every insecurity and resentment she had carried for years. Here was a man who moved through the world with the kind of easy confidence she had never been allowed, accompanied by a child whose trust in the system Blake had lost long ago. "Turn around," Blake ordered, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from other people in the hallway. "Hands on the wall. You fit the description of a suspect in a robbery 2 blocks over." Jerome felt the familiar mixture of disbelief and resignation that came with these moments. "Officer, with respect." "I believe you're mistaken. I'm due in court in 15 minutes for a scheduled hearing. If you have concerns, I'd be happy to have the bailiff verify my appointment," I said, hands on the wall. Blake's voice carried across the marble hallway, designed to create a scene and establish dominance through public humiliation. Tall, black male, dark clothing, carrying a bag. "You match the description perfectly." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at the adults around her. "But Daddy didn't steal anything. He builds things. He makes places safe for people." Her voice cracked with the confusion of a child watching her understanding of the world crumble in real time. Officer Rodriguez appeared at Blake's shoulder, his rookie nervousness evident in the way he kept glancing between his partner and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Blake, maybe we should check the dispatch again. The description I heard was a teenager in a hoodie, not a businessman in a suit." "Shut it, Rodriguez." Blake snapped, her authority challenged and her temper fraying. She stepped closer to Jerome, close enough that Maya could smell her coffee breath and see the beads of perspiration forming on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "You think that suit makes you special? I can make you miss that hearing. I can book you for resisting disorderly conduct and obstruction before you can blink." Jerome looked down at his daughter's frightened face, then back at Blake. In that moment, he made a decision that would echo through the halls of justice for months to come. "Officer Blake," he said quietly, "I understand you have a job to do, but I also have rights. If you want to arrest me, then do it. But I won't be intimidated or humiliated in front of my daughter for the crime of being successful while black." He turned his back on her and began walking toward the courtroom doors, Maya's hand firmly in his, leaving Blake standing in the hallway with her authority challenged and her rage building to a dangerous boil. Courtroom 415 possessed the kind of solemn dignity that was meant to inspire respect for justice, with its rich mahogany paneling and tall windows that cast geometric patterns of light across the polished floors. Judge Patricia Williams presided from the elevated bench with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 30 years balancing the scales of justice, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and her dark eyes sharp with intelligence and experience. Jerome entered the courtroom with Maya at his side, both of them moving with the respectful quiet that sacred spaces demanded. Maya's eyes widened as she took in the grandeur of the room, from the American flag hanging beside the judge's bench to the gallery of wooden pews that reminded her more of church than the courthouse she had imagined. "Is that the lady with the big hammer?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible in the hushed atmosphere. "That's Judge Williams," Jerome whispered back, guiding his daughter to a seat in the front row. "And remember, it's called a gavel, not a hammer. She uses it to keep order and make sure everyone gets heard fairly." Bailiff Samuel Washington, a man whose 25 years of courthouse experience had taught him to read situations before they exploded, nodded respectfully to Jerome as he took his seat. Sam had seen enough injustice in his time to recognize a good man when he saw one, and something in Jerome's bearing reminded him of his own son, who was working his way through engineering school with the same quiet determination. Judge Williams was reviewing the morning's docket when the heavy oak doors of her courtroom banged open with a force that shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a rock through glass. Officer Blake strode down the center aisle, her boots clicking against the hardwood with military precision, followed by Rodriguez, who looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. The murmur of conversation that had been quietly filling the courtroom died instantly, replaced by the kind of tense silence that preceded either revelation or disaster. Even the court reporter paused her stenotype machine, her fingers hovering over the keys as she tried to process what was happening. Officer Blake Judge Williams said, her voice carrying the kind of controlled authority that could silence a riot or stop a charging bull. "This is a court of law, not a parade ground. Is there an emergency that requires you to interrupt these proceedings?" Blake ignored the judge's question, her eyes locked on Jerome with the kind of predatory focus that made Maya shrink back against the wooden pew. "Jerome Thompson," she called out, her voice echoing off the paneled walls. "Stand up. You're under arrest." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs as spectators tried to process what they were witnessing. Maya's small hand found her father's arm, her eyes wide with fear and confusion as she looked from the angry police officer to the stern judge to her father's face, which had gone very still and very calm. Judge Williams brought her gavel down with a sharp crack that cut through the chaos like a blade. "Officer Blake, you will explain yourself immediately, or you will remove yourself from my courtroom." What is the meaning of this disruption? Blake unclipped her handcuffs with theatrical flourish, the metal catching the morning light as she held them up for all to see. Your Honor, this man is a suspect in an armed robbery that occurred approximately 30 minutes ago. He assaulted a police officer in the hallway when I attempted to detain him for questioning. I'm taking him into custody. Jerome stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, keeping one hand on Maya's shoulder to reassure her, even as his own world tilted dangerously off its axis. Your Honor, that is completely false. I have been in this courthouse for the past hour preparing for my scheduled hearing with the zoning board. I never touched Officer Blake or anyone else. He's lying, Blake snapped, taking a step closer to the rail that separated the gallery from the well of the court. They always lie, Your Honor. He shoved me when I tried to stop him, then fled into this courtroom thinking he could hide behind his lawyer. Maya's voice cut through the tension with the clarity of absolute truth. That's not what happened. Daddy was showing me his blueprints, and she was being mean for no reason. He didn't push anybody. He just walked away because she was scaring me. Judge Williams leaned forward, her attention fully focused on the small girl whose testimony carried the weight of innocent observation. Young lady, what's your name? Maya Thompson, ma'am. That's my daddy, and he doesn't lie. He teaches me that lying is wrong, and he always tells the truth even when it's hard. Blake felt control slipping away from her like water through her fingers, and desperation made her reckless. Your Honor, the suspect is using his child as a shield. This is exactly the kind of manipulation tactics we see from career criminals. Career criminal. Judge Williams repeated, her eyebrows rising in a way that anyone who knew her would recognize as a dangerous sign. Officer Blake, do you have this man's criminal history in front of you? Blake faltered, realizing she had made an assumption without evidence. Well, no. But the way he was acting, the expensive clothes, the attitude, Officer Rodriguez. Judge Williams interrupted her gaze, shifting to the younger man who had been standing silently behind his partner. Did you witness this alleged assault? Rodriguez felt every eye in the courtroom boring into him, felt the weight of his training officer's expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. But when he looked at Maya's tear-streaked face and Jerome's dignified composure, he knew what truth looked like. Your Honor. Rodriguez said, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. Mr. Thompson was standing in the hallway reviewing some papers. Officer Blake approached him and demanded identification, which he provided. When she ordered him to turn around and put his hands on the wall, he asked about probable cause, and then walked toward the courtroom. He didn't touch anyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake whirled around to face her partner, her face flushed with rage and humiliation. Rodriguez, what the hell do you think you're doing? I'm telling the truth, Rodriguez said quietly, and in those 4 simple words, the entire dynamic of the courtroom shifted. Judge Williams set down her reading glasses with the deliberate care of someone who had reached the end of her patience. The morning light streaming through the tall windows seemed to shift, casting new shadows across the courtroom as the balance of power tilted on its axis. Officer Blake, the judge, said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned attorneys nervous. You claim Mr. Thompson fits the description of a robbery suspect. What was that description? Blake straightened her shoulders, grasping for the confidence that had been steadily eroding since she entered the courtroom. Tall, black male, dark clothing, carrying a bag approximately 6 feet in height, Judge Williams reached for a file on her desk, her movements unhurried but purposeful. I have the police scanner running in my chambers during court hours, Officer Blake. It's helpful to know when emergencies might affect court proceedings. She opened the file and read directly from her notes. The robbery suspect from this morning's incident was described as a teenager approximately 17 years old wearing a red hooded sweatshirt and blue jeans. The suspect was reported to be 5'6" and weighing approximately 130 pounds. Maya looked up at her father, then at Officer Blake, then back at the judge. But Daddy's not a teenager and he's wearing a suit, not a hoodie. Why did she say he looked like someone he doesn't look like? The innocent question hung in the courtroom air like smoke from a fired weapon. Blake felt her face flush as she realized the trap she had walked into. But pride and desperation drove her forward into even more dangerous territory. Suspects change clothes, Your Honor. The stolen goods could be in his bag. I have probable cause to search his belongings. Jerome lifted his leather portfolio, holding it where everyone could see. This bag contains architectural blueprints for the community center project we're here to discuss, along with zoning applications and structural engineering reports. Officer Blake is welcome to examine them, but I believe she'll find them rather technical and probably quite boring. He will do no such thing without a warrant, Judge Williams said firmly. Officer Blake, you are fishing without a license in my courtroom, and I don't appreciate having my court used as your personal interrogation room. Blake felt the walls closing in around her, felt her authority, and her narrative crumbling like a house built on sand. In her 15 years of policing, she had never had her word questioned so thoroughly, so publicly, and the humiliation was driving her toward a decision that would change everything. I have qualified immunity, Blake said, her voice rising with desperation masquerading as authority. And I have the right to detain suspects during an active investigation. You can't tell me how to do police work, Judge. I'm taking him in, and if you have a problem with it, you can take it up with my captain. She turned away from the bench dismissively, a gesture that would have been shocking even if the rest of her behavior had been professional, and reached for her handcuffs again. Thompson, hands behind your back. Now. Officer Blake. Judge Williams called out, her voice carrying a warning that anyone with sense would have heeded. Do not take another step. But Blake was beyond the reach of wisdom or caution. She grabbed Jerome's wrist, twisting it with unnecessary force that made him wince and drop his portfolio. Blueprints scattered across the courtroom floor like oversized confetti, the careful plans for swing sets and basketball courts, and reading nooks mixing with the dust and tension. Maya cried out in alarm, reaching for her father as Bailiff Washington moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, stepping between Blake and Jerome with the kind of protective instinct that had kept his courtroom peaceful for over 2 decades. Officer, you need to step back and let the judge handle this, Sam said firmly, his large frame blocking Blake's access to Jerome. Blake looked at the bailiff, at the judge, at the courtroom full of witnesses, and made the worst decision of her career. She placed both hands on Sam's chest and shoved him backward, the gesture not particularly violent but absolutely indefensible. The courtroom froze as if someone had stopped time itself. Blake realized what she had done the moment her hands left Sam's uniform, saw the shock and horror in everyone's faces, but it was too late to take back what couldn't be taken back. Judge Williams rose from her chair with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had just witnessed something that would haunt her courtroom for years to come. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority backed by absolute certainty. Officer Cassandra Blake, she said, each word falling like a hammer blow, you have just committed assault on a court officer in full view of this bench and these witnesses. You have disrupted these proceedings beyond any reasonable limit, and you have shown contempt for this court, for the law, and for basic human decency. Blake backed away from the bailiff, her hands shaking as the magnitude of her actions finally penetrated her rage. I was effecting a lawful arrest. He was resisting, and the bailiff interfered with police business. Bailiff Washington. Judge Williams continued as if Blake hadn't spoken. Please place Officer Blake under arrest for criminal contempt of court, assault on a court officer, and disruption of judicial proceedings. Maya watched in stunned silence as Sam pulled out his own handcuffs, the sound of metal against metal seeming impossibly loud in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Officer Blake, you have the right to remain silent. He began, his voice steady and professional, even as Blake began to struggle against the inevitable. You can't arrest me, Blake screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. I'm a police officer. I was doing my job. In this courtroom, Judge Williams said with finality, you are a defendant. Nothing more, Nothing less. As the handcuffs clicked into place around Blake's wrists, Maya looked up at her father with eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. Daddy, does this mean the mean lady learned about consequences? Jerome wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her close as they watched Officer Blake being led away in the same handcuffs she had intended for him. Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to learn the hard way that actions have consequences just like you do. The holding cell beneath the courthouse was designed to be forgettable, a concrete box painted institutional gray where people waited for their slice of justice or injustice. Officer Blake sat on the narrow bench, her uniform wrinkled and her platinum hair escaping from its regulation bun, staring at the floor as the reality of her situation finally began to penetrate her shock and rage. 2 floors above, in Judge Williams's chambers, the atmosphere was electric with tension and possibility. Jerome sat in a leather chair across from the judge's massive desk. Maya curled up beside him with her head on his shoulder, exhausted by the morning's events, but unwilling to let her father out of her sight. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Williams said, pouring water from a crystal pitcher into 3 glasses. "I want you to understand that what happened in my courtroom today was extraordinary in the worst possible way. Officer Blake's behavior was so far outside the bounds of acceptable conduct that I'm still processing it myself." Attorney Rebecca Foster entered the chambers without knocking, her professional composure barely containing her excitement. She was a woman who had built her career fighting injustice, but cases this clear-cut, this well-documented, this perfect for creating real change were rarer than honest politicians. "Judge Williams, Mr. Thompson," Rebecca said, setting her briefcase down with the efficiency of someone who meant business. "I got here as fast as I could after seeing the news alerts. This case has the potential to be something special, something that could create real change in how police interact with citizens." Maya looked up from her father's shoulder, studying the newcomer with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you one of the good guys? Because sometimes it's hard to tell who the good guys are until something bad happens." Rebecca knelt down to Maya's eye level, recognizing the wisdom in the child's observation. "I try to be one of the good guys, Maya. My job is to help people when police officers forget that their job is to protect everyone, not scare them." Judge Williams leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. "Miss Foster, I should warn you that Officer Blake's behavior, while inexcusable, may not be an isolated incident. Captain Derek Morrison from the 21st Precinct called my office 3 times in the past hour demanding Blake's immediate release and threatening various forms of professional retaliation." Jerome felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard about Morrison, the kind of old-school captain who protected his officers regardless of their actions, who saw criticism of police behavior as an attack on law enforcement itself. "What did you tell him?" Rebecca asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "I told him that Officer Blake would remain in custody until her arraignment, that my courtroom is not subject to police interference, and that any attempt to intimidate this court or its witnesses would result in federal charges." Judge Williams smiled grimly. "He hung up on me." Maya sat up straighter, her young mind working through the implications with startling clarity. "So there are more bad police officers who want to protect the mean lady instead of protecting people like us. Sometimes, sweetheart," Jerome said, carefully, "people stick together even when one of them does something wrong because they're more worried about looking bad than they are about doing what's right." Rebecca was already pulling files from her briefcase, her mind racing through legal strategies and precedents. "Judge Williams, we need to preserve all evidence immediately. The courtroom recording any security footage from the hallways, Officer Rodriguez's statement." "Everything. Already done," the judge replied. "But Mr. Thompson, there's something else you should know. The vending machine in the hallway where Officer Blake first approached you, it's not just a snack dispenser." Jerome looked up sharply, his engineer's mind immediately grasping the implications. "The newer smart vendors have integrated security systems for transaction protection and accessibility compliance, audio and video recording capabilities." "Exactly. And unlike the courthouse security system, which is controlled by the building administration, that machine is operated by VendTech Solutions, a private company. If Officer Blake planned this encounter in advance, if she discussed her intentions with Officer Rodriguez before approaching you. Maya's eyes widened with excitement. The snack machine saw everything, like a robot witness. Rebecca was already reaching for her phone. We need to get a preservation order immediately. If Captain Morrison realizes what that machine recorded, it'll mysteriously malfunction within the hour. The door to the judge's chambers burst open without warning, causing everyone to jump. Captain Derek Morrison filled the doorway, his massive frame and red face radiating barely controlled anger. Behind him stood two uniformed officers, their hands resting meaningfully on their belts. Morrison's eyes swept the room, taking in the judge, the attorney, the father, and the little girl, who had somehow managed to derail what should have been a simple arrest. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of 30 years of absolute authority in his precinct. "Judge Williams," he said, "not bothering with pleasantries, we need to discuss the immediate release of Officer Blake. There's been a misunderstanding, emotions ran high, but she's a 15-year veteran with an exemplary record. She deserves better than to be thrown in a cage over a simple mistake." Maya slipped off her chair and walked over to the captain, looking up at him with the kind of fearless curiosity that only children possessed. "Why are you trying to help the mean lady who hurt my daddy? Don't you want police officers to be nice to kids and families?" Morrison looked down at Maya, clearly uncomfortable with being challenged by a 9-year-old, especially one whose questions cut straight to the heart of everything he was trying to avoid confronting. Little girl, grown-up business is complicated. Sometimes good people make mistakes when they're trying to keep everyone safe. But she wasn't trying to keep us safe, Maya said with devastating simplicity. She was trying to hurt us, and you want to help her do it again to other families. The room fell silent as the truth of Maya's words hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, impossible to ignore and even more impossible to argue with. The courthouse hallway felt different now, charged with the electricity of impending revelation. Rebecca Foster moved with the focused intensity of a lawyer who smelled victory, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with VendTech's legal department, while Jerome and Maya flanked her like a small army of justice. The machine's model number should be on a silver tag on the back panel, Rebecca said into her phone, then looked at Jerome. "Your architectural knowledge of this building could be crucial here. Do you know the electrical layout for this floor?" Jerome nodded, his engineer's mind already visualizing the building's infrastructure. "I did the consultation for the courthouse renovation 3 years ago. The smart vending machines are on a separate circuit from the main security system because they need consistent power for their refrigeration and payment processing. They have independent backup batteries and cloud storage for transaction data." Maya tugged on her father's sleeve, her eyes bright with excitement at being part of something important. "Daddy does that mean the snack machine is like a secret superhero that was watching the whole time?" "Something like that, sweetheart," Jerome smiled despite the tension. "Sometimes the most ordinary things can become extraordinary witnesses." They approached the gleaming vending machine, which hummed quietly as it dispensed cold drinks and snacks to courthouse visitors. To most people, it was just another piece of modern convenience, but Jerome saw it through an engineer's eyes, understanding the sophisticated technology hidden behind its simple facade. Rebecca finished her call and turned to them, her expression mixing hope with urgency. VendTech can access the recording remotely, but they need the exact serial number and location verification. They're also sending their legal team to file a motion to preserve the evidence before anyone can claim the machine malfunctioned. Jerome walked around to the back of the machine, his trained eyes quickly locating the manufacturer's plate. VT4, K2024, CHI0847, he read aloud. "And look at this, Rebecca. See these indicator lights? The machine's been continuously recording for the past 6 months. Everything's stored in encrypted cloud servers that automatically back up every 4 hours. Maya pressed her face against the machine's glass front, studying her reflection in the surface. Can you hear what the mean lady said about Daddy? Can you hear her being mean before she even talked to us? That's exactly what we're hoping to find out, Rebecca said, kneeling down to Maya's level. Sometimes people say things when they think nobody's listening that show what they were really thinking. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway opened with a soft ding, and Officer Rodriguez stepped out looking pale and nervous. Behind him was a man in coveralls, carrying a toolkit, his Ventec uniform clearly visible even from a distance. Rodriguez spotted the small group gathered around the vending machine, and his face went even paler. He approached slowly, his rookie instincts, warring with whatever orders he had been given. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez called out, his voice cracking with stress. "You folks need to step away from that machine. There's been a maintenance issue reported. Safety concerns." Rebecca stepped forward, her lawyer instincts immediately on alert. "What kind of safety concerns, Officer Rodriguez?" "The machine appears to be functioning normally." The technician looked confused, glancing between Rodriguez and the machine. "Officer, you told me this unit was malfunctioning and needed immediate data recovery, but all the indicators show normal operation." "Are you sure this is the right machine?" Maya looked up at Rodriguez with the penetrating stare that only children could manage, seeing past the uniform to the person underneath. "You look scared. Are you scared because you know the machine heard something bad?" Rodriguez knelt down to Maya's level, and for a moment his carefully maintained professional facade cracked. "Maya, I made some mistakes today. Big mistakes. And now some people want me to make even bigger mistakes to cover up the first ones." Jerome placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder while keeping his eyes on Rodriguez. "Officer, you have a choice here. You can keep following orders that you know are wrong, or you can do what you know is right. Maya shouldn't have to witness any more adult failures today." The technician was already connecting his diagnostic equipment to the machine, his professional integrity at odds with what he was being asked to do. "Sir, this machine's data is perfectly intact. If I wipe the drives now, I'd be destroying evidence of normal operations. That could be illegal depending on what's going on here." Rodriguez looked at Maya, at Jerome's quiet dignity, at Rebecca's determined professionalism, and made the decision that would define the rest of his career. He pulled out his radio and took a deep breath. "Dispatch Officer Rodriguez, cancel the maintenance request for the courthouse vending machine. False alarm. The unit is operating normally." Maya smiled up at him with the kind of pure approval that could heal wounds or break hearts. That was the right choice. "My daddy always says doing the right thing is scary sometimes, but it's always worth it." Captain Morrison's face turned a dangerous shade of purple as he listened to the radio chatter from the courthouse hallway. Standing in his office at the 21st Precinct, surrounded by commendations and photographs from 30 years of police work, he felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. "Rodriguez, get back to the station immediately," Morrison barked into his radio. "And bring Thompson and the lawyer with you. We need to sort this mess out properly." Rebecca Foster's voice came through clearly over the radio frequency. "Captain Morrison, Mr. Thompson and his daughter are under no obligation to accompany your officers anywhere. If you have questions, you can direct them through proper legal channels." Morrison slammed his fist on his desk hard enough to make his coffee mug jump. In all his years of commanding officers, he had never had civilians openly defy his authority, especially not with half the department listening on the radio. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez entered the precinct station looking like a man walking to his own execution. Behind him came Jerome and Maya, flanked by Rebecca and 2 FBI agents who had arrived with remarkable speed once news of the courthouse incident reached federal attention. The precinct bullpen fell silent as the small group walked through, every officer stopping their work to stare at the man who had somehow managed to get one of their own arrested, and the little girl who had somehow managed to make it all happen with nothing more than honest questions. Maya looked around the room with wide eyes, taking in the desks covered with files, the holding cells visible through reinforced glass, the American flag hanging from the ceiling. "Daddy, this place feels angry. Why does it feel so angry?" Jerome squeezed his daughter's hand gently. "Sometimes places absorb the emotions of the people who work there, sweetheart. This place has seen a lot of anger and frustration over the years." Morrison emerged from his office like a storm cloud. Given human form, his presence immediately dominating the room. Every officer straightened unconsciously as he approached the product of years of conditioning and intimidation. Thompson Morrison said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence of the bullpen. "You and your lawyer are going to sit down with me and discuss how we're going to resolve this situation quietly and professionally." Maya stepped forward before anyone could stop her, looking up at the captain with the fearless curiosity that had already derailed one adult's plans today. "Are you the boss of the mean lady who tried to hurt my daddy?" Morrison looked down at the small girl, clearly unprepared for direct questioning from a 9-year-old. "Little lady, this is police business. Adults are talking here." "But I'm part of this too," Maya said with the logic that only children possessed. "The mean lady scared me and she lied about my daddy, and now you're trying to make it so she doesn't get in trouble for being mean. That's not fair." Rebecca stepped forward, her legal instincts on high alert. "Captain Morrison, my client, and his daughter have been through enough trauma for one day. If you have questions, we can schedule a proper interview with appropriate legal representation." Morrison's radio crackled to life with urgent chatter about news vans arriving outside the station, about FBI vehicles pulling up to the courthouse, about social media posts showing footage from the courtroom that was already being shared thousands of times. "Sir," a sergeant called out from across the room, "Channel 7 is on line 1, and the Tribune wants a statement. They're saying they have video of the courthouse incident." Morrison felt the walls closing in around him, felt the careful balance of power and protection that had defined his career beginning to shift in ways he couldn't control. "Lock down the station," he ordered. "Nobody gets in. Nobody gets out until we sort this mess." Jerome looked at Maya, then at Rebecca, recognizing the signs of an increasingly desperate man making increasingly dangerous decisions. "Captain, you're making this worse for everyone, including yourself. The truth is already out there. Trying to suppress it will only make the eventual consequences more severe." "The truth," Morrison said, his voice dripping with 30 years of cynicism, "is whatever I say it is in my house. And right now, you and your family are guests in my house." Maya walked over to one of the windows that looked out onto the street, standing on her tiptoes to see over the sill. "Daddy, there are a lot of people outside with cameras, and some cars that look like the important government cars from TV shows." Rebecca joined Maya at the window, her expression growing more confident as she counted the vehicles gathering outside. "Captain Morrison, I believe those are federal agents. And unless I'm mistaken, that's a satellite truck from CNN. Your house is about to become very public property." Morrison followed their gaze and felt his stomach drop as he saw the scale of the response gathering outside his station. What had started as a simple matter of protecting one of his officers had somehow escalated into a media circus and federal investigation. Rodriguez appeared at Morrison's shoulder, his young face troubled but determined. "Captain, sir, I think we need to consider that maybe Officer Blake made some serious mistakes today, and maybe trying to cover for those mistakes is going to make things worse for all of us." Morrison whirled on his rookie officer, his authority challenged by one of his own. "Rodriguez, you're obviously confused about what happened out there. Why don't you go write a supplemental report that clarifies your earlier statements?" Maya looked up at Rodriguez with encouraging eyes. "You don't have to be scared of him. My daddy says brave people protect other people even when it's hard." The tension inside the 21st Precinct had reached a breaking point with FBI agents surrounding the building while Captain Morrison paced his office like a caged animal. Jerome held Maya close as they sat in the main bullpen watching the captain's increasing desperation with growing concern. Morrison burst out of his office, his face red with rage and panic. "This ends now," he declared, pulling out his service weapon and pointing it at Jerome. "Everyone outside backs off, or this guy and his kid become casualties of resisting arrest." Maya pressed herself against her father's chest, her small body trembling with fear, but her voice remained steady. "Daddy, why is he pointing that at us? We didn't do anything wrong." "Sometimes," sweetheart Jerome said quietly, his arms tightening protectively around his daughter. "People make very bad choices when they're scared and angry. But remember what I always tell you about truth. Truth doesn't go away just because people don't want to see it," Maya whispered, reciting the lesson her father had taught her. Officer Rodriguez watched from across the room, his own weapon still holstered, his face a mask of internal conflict. He looked at Maya's frightened face, at Jerome's protective stance, at Morrison's wild eyes, and felt something inside him break free from years of conditioning and fear. Captain Rodriguez said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Put the gun down. This isn't who we're supposed to be." Morrison whirled toward his subordinate, keeping the weapon trained on Jerome. "Rodriguez, you're already walking a thin line. Don't make this worse for yourself." "Worse for myself?" Rodriguez let out a bitter laugh. "Captain, I've been watching good people get hurt all day because I was too scared to stand up for what's right. I can't do it anymore." Maya looked up at Rodriguez with tears in her eyes, but hope in her voice. "You can be a good police officer. You can protect people instead of scaring them. My daddy believes in you." The words hit Rodriguez like a physical blow, reminding him of why he had become a police officer in the first place. He had wanted to serve and protect, to be the kind of officer that children looked up to instead of feared. Outside, FBI negotiator Special Agent Sarah Chen spoke through a bullhorn. "Captain Morrison, we know you're holding civilians inside. Let them go and we can work together to resolve this situation peacefully." Morrison dragged Jerome to the window, using him as a human shield while keeping Maya close enough to ensure compliance. "I want safe passage out of here," he shouted through the glass. "And I want all charges against Officer Blake dropped, or these people don't leave here alive." Maya's voice cut through the tension with startling clarity. "You're not really a bad person, are you? You're just scared that everyone will find out you made mistakes." Morrison looked down at the little girl whose innocent questions had somehow unraveled his entire world. "Kid, you don't understand anything about the real world." "I understand that hurting people doesn't make you feel better," Maya said with the wisdom that sometimes came from the mouths of babes. "It just makes you lonelier and sadder." "Is that what you want?" Rodriguez saw his opportunity when Morrison's attention wavered, distracted by Maya's unexpected insight. Moving with the speed of desperation and newfound courage, he lunged forward and grabbed Morrison's gun hand, wrestling for control of the weapon. "Maya, run!" Jerome shouted, pushing his daughter toward the back of the room as the two officers struggled for the gun. Maya didn't run. Instead, she did something that would be remembered in the annals of police reform for years to come. She walked over to the desk where Morrison's radio sat, and standing on her tiptoes to reach the microphone, pressed the transmit button. "Hello," her small voice echoed through every police radio in the city. "This is Maya Thompson, and I'm 9 years old, and there are police officers fighting in here, and I want someone to help us, please." The transmission cut through all the adult posturing and political maneuvering, reaching every officer, every dispatcher, every emergency responder in Chicago with the raw honesty of a child asking for help. Rodriguez managed to disarm Morrison, just as FBI agents breached the front entrance, their tactical gear and shouted commands filling the bullpen with controlled chaos. Morrison dropped to his knees, the weight of his choices finally crushing him as Maya's radio message continued to echo in his ears. As the dust settled and handcuffs clicked around Morrison's wrists, Maya ran to her father and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Daddy, is it over now? Can we go home and tell Mommy that we're safe?" Jerome lifted his daughter into his arms, holding her tight as they watched Morrison being led away. "Yes, sweetheart. It's over. And because you were so brave today, a lot of other families are going to be safer too." 2 weeks after the incident that had shaken Chicago's police department to its core, Courtroom 415 had been transformed into something unprecedented in the city's history. Gone were the usual trappings of adversarial justice, replaced by a circle of chairs where former enemies would sit face to face and attempt something far more difficult than punishment understanding. Judge Patricia Williams had agreed to facilitate what she called restorative justice proceedings, a process that would determine not just consequences, but paths forward for everyone involved. Maya sat between her parents, her small hands folded in her lap, wearing her best dress, and the serious expression of someone who understood the importance of the moment. Officer Cassandra Blake entered the room in civilian clothes, her platinum hair hanging loose around her shoulders, making her look younger and somehow more vulnerable than she had in uniform. She took the seat across from Jerome and Maya, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights, and the kind of soul-searching that could only come from facing the complete destruction of everything you thought you were. "Ms. Blake," Judge Williams began gently, "this process is voluntary for all parties. You're here because you chose to be, and because you've expressed a desire to understand what led to the events in this courtroom 2 weeks ago." Blake nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've had a lot of time to think, Your Honor. About what I did, about who I became, about how I got so lost that I could look at a man and his little girl and see threats instead of people." Maya shifted in her chair, studying Blake with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Why were you so scared of my daddy? He builds playgrounds and libraries. He's not scary at all." The question hit Blake like a physical blow, forcing her to confront the absurdity of her actions when stripped of all the rationalizations and justifications she had built up over the years. "I wasn't scared of your daddy, sweetheart," Blake said, her voice cracking. "I was scared of what your daddy represented. He was everything I thought I could never be: successful, confident, respected. And instead of admiring those qualities, I resented them." Jerome leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but probing. "Cassandra, what happened to you that made success in others feel like a threat to yourself?" Blake was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands as years of buried pain rose to the surface. "I grew up in a house where my father told me every day that I'd never amount to anything because I was too weak, too stupid, too worthless. When I became a police officer, I thought the uniform would prove him wrong. But every time I saw someone who had achieved what I was still trying to prove I deserved, it was like hearing his voice all over again." Maya's eyes filled with tears, not for herself, but for the pain she heard in Blake's voice. "That's really sad. Your daddy should have told you that you were special and smart and good. My daddy tells me those things every day." "Your daddy sounds like a good man," Blake said, looking directly at Jerome for the first time since entering the room. "I'm sorry I tried to hurt someone who was clearly a wonderful father. I'm sorry I scared you, Maya. Children should never have to be afraid of police officers." Dr. Sarah Martinez, a trauma specialist who was observing the session, spoke up quietly. "Cassandra, recognizing the source of your pain is important, but it doesn't excuse the choices you made. How do we move from understanding to accountability?" Blake nodded, accepting the challenge. "I want to work with the police academy to develop new training programs, not just about implicit bias or community relations, but about recognizing when our own pain is driving our actions. I want to help other officers avoid becoming what I became, Officer Rodriguez, who had been sitting silently in the circle, finally spoke up. "I want to help with that, too. I almost made the same mistakes Officer Blake did just because I was scared to stand up to authority. We need to teach officers that courage sometimes means protecting people from other officers." Maya looked around the circle of adults, her young mind processing the complex emotions and revelations she was witnessing. So everyone made mistakes, but now everyone wants to help other people not make the same mistakes. "That's exactly right, sweetheart," Jerome said, stroking his daughter's hair. "Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do with our pain is use it to prevent other people from experiencing the same hurt." Judge Williams observed the exchange with quiet satisfaction. In 30 years on the bench, she had seen countless cases end with punishment and resentment. This was something entirely different. The transformation of trauma into wisdom, of conflict into collaboration. "The healing process will take time," the judge said. "But what I'm seeing here today gives me hope that real change is possible when people choose understanding over vengeance." 6 months later, the police academy training facility looked different than it had in decades. Gone were the military-style posters and aggressive slogans, replaced by images of officers helping children, facilitating community meetings, and working alongside social workers and mental health professionals. Cassandra Blake stood at the front of a classroom filled with rookie officers no longer wearing the uniform she had once thought defined her worth. Instead, she wore simple civilian clothes and carried the authority that came from hard-won wisdom rather than institutional power. "When I was your age," she told the young recruits, "I thought being a good police officer meant never showing weakness, never admitting mistakes, and always asserting dominance. I was wrong about all of those things, and my mistakes nearly destroyed innocent lives." Maya Thompson sat in the back of the classroom, now 10 years old and serving as a junior consultant for the Academy's new Community Voices program. She raised her small hand with a question that cut straight to the heart of modern policing. "Ms. Cassie, what's the difference between being strong and being mean? Because sometimes grown-ups think they're the same thing, but they're not." Blake smiled at the girl who had inadvertently saved her soul. "That's exactly the question every police officer should ask themselves every day, Maya. Being strong means protecting people who are vulnerable. Being mean means hurting people because you're hurting inside." Jerome Thompson entered the classroom carrying architectural plans for the new community center that had become a model for police community partnerships nationwide. The project had expanded far beyond its original scope, incorporating mental health services, conflict resolution programs, and educational initiatives designed by committees that included former adversaries working side by side. Officer Rodriguez Jerome called to the young man who had become the Academy's lead instructor for ethical decision-making. Maya wanted to show the recruits her latest design for the children's meditation garden. Tommy Rodriguez, now promoted to sergeant and recognized as a rising star in police reform, knelt down to Maya's level as she unrolled her drawing. "Tell us about your design, Maya. What makes this space special?" Maya pointed to different areas of her carefully drawn plan with the seriousness of a professional architect. "This circle is where kids can sit when they're scared or angry, and police officers can sit with them and just listen instead of trying to fix everything right away. And these flowers are all different colors because my daddy says diversity makes everything stronger and more beautiful." Blake watched the interaction with profound gratitude, remembering the angry, frightened officer she had been, and marveling at the healing that had taken place through the simple act of listening to a child's wisdom. Captain Rodriguez had been replaced by Captain Elena Vasquez, a reform-minded leader who had implemented community oversight boards and mandatory continuing education in empathy and de-escalation. Under her leadership, complaints against officers had dropped by 60%, while community trust had reached historic highs. Derek Morrison sat in a federal minimum security prison serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation in exposing department-wide corruption. But even from prison, he participated in video conferences with reform committees, his own transformation serving as evidence that change was possible, even for the most entrenched personalities. The ripple effects had spread far beyond Chicago. Cities across the nation were implementing similar programs, and Maya had become something of a celebrity in reform circles, traveling with her father to speak at conferences about the power of children's perspectives in healing community trauma. Ms. Blake Maya said as the training session concluded, "Do you think the police officers you used to work with would be proud of who you are now?" Blake considered the question with the kind of thoughtful reflection that had replaced her old reactivity. "I think the best of them would be Maya, and I hope the ones who aren't ready yet will find their own path to becoming better just like you helped me find mine." As the recruits filed out of the classroom, each carrying a small card with Maya's simple rules for being a good helper. Listen more than you talk. Protect people who are scared, and remember that everyone has feelings. Jerome reflected on how profoundly his daughter had shaped not just their own lives, but the lives of countless strangers who would benefit from her innocent wisdom for generations to come. 1 year after the incident that had changed everything, Courtroom 415 hosted a ceremony unlike any in its century-long history. The same space where Officer Blake had once tried to arrest Jerome Thompson now celebrated the graduation of the first class of officers trained under the new restorative policing program that had emerged from their confrontation. Maya Thompson, now 10 and missing her 2 front teeth, stood at the podium with the poise of someone who had learned that her voice could change the world. Behind her sat Judge Patricia Williams, Jerome and Lisa Thompson, Cassandra Blake, Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, and dozens of community members whose lives had been touched by the transformation that began with one little girl's honest questions. "When I was 9, Maya began her words, carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. I didn't understand why some grown-ups were so scared of other grown-ups that they forgot how to be kind. But I learned that sometimes people need help remembering how to see each other as real people with feelings and families and dreams." The audience included police chiefs from 12 different cities who had traveled to Chicago to study the program, along with families whose own encounters with law enforcement had been transformed by the new approaches pioneered in Maya's honor. Cassandra Blake stepped forward to address the graduating class, her transformation from antagonist to advocate complete. "These badges you're receiving today don't make you powerful," she told them. "They make you responsible. Responsible for protecting the Maya Thompsons of the world, for listening to the Jerome Thompsons, for remembering that every person you encounter is someone's beloved family member." Jerome cut the ribbon on a memorial garden outside the courthouse dedicated to all the families who had suffered from police misconduct, but also celebrating the officers who had found the courage to change. Maya's design included benches where community members and police officers could sit together, flowers that bloomed in every season, and a small fountain whose gentle sound encouraged quiet conversation rather than confrontation. The ripple effects had spread far beyond Chicago. The Maya protocol for police interactions with families had been adopted in over 200 jurisdictions. Blake's training program had become a model for reforming police culture nationwide. Rodriguez's ethical decision-making framework was being taught in academies across the country. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered for photographs, Maya found herself surrounded by the new graduates, young men and women who had chosen law enforcement specifically because they wanted to be part of the solution rather than the problem. "Maya," one young officer asked, "what advice do you have for us as we start our careers?" Maya thought for a moment with the seriousness that had become her trademark. "Remember that being a police officer means you get to help families stay together instead of tearing them apart. And always listen to kids because sometimes we see things that grown-ups forget how to see." Jerome watched his daughter with pride and wonder, knowing that her innocent questions had not only saved their family, but had created a legacy of healing that would protect countless other families for generations to come. If this story of courage, transformation, and the power of a child's honesty moved you, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments how you think we can continue building bridges between communities and law enforcement. Share your thoughts about times when speaking truth to power made a difference in your own life, and together we can keep working toward a world where justice truly means protection and healing for everyone.